They say that war has become a more distant affair. Well, in some ways that is true. I mean, armies in the Second World War kill each other from bombers high in the sky or with tanks and artillery firing across the battlefield. But modern war still needs old-fashioned modes of killing. In the Italian mountains, the infantry really are close enough to see the whites of each other's eyes, and a knife is just as good as a rifle. For the men here, the fighting, the killing, the dying, still up close and personal. I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II in real-time special on mountain warfare in Italy. I've talked a lot about the fighting in Italy, as you likely have seen in the weekly episodes, but since December, the Allied forces have been held up at the German Gustav line, anchored by Monte Cassino and its ancient monastery. Back in January, they made a first unsuccessful attempt to break that line, but they have now thrown themselves at it again this month with Operation Avenger. That made us think that now might be a good time to take a closer look at the experience of fighting in the mountains. So far, it's been a war of position rather than one of movement. The Germans call it Stellungskrieg. Gains are measured in meters, and slow pushes through hills, mountains, and valleys lined with bunkers, blockhouses, and machine gun nests. All of this is happening in absolutely miserable conditions. The mud and the rains of autumn, and the fog and the blizzards of winter. And because there are few mountain-trained troops on either side in this theater, the men here are figuring out things as they go and learning hard lessons in the process. But you don't need to go to the mountains of Italy for your learning. This episode is made possible by CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is the streaming service for people who want to know more. It's the best place to find and watch documentaries about science, history, technology, nature, travel, and much, much more. There's plenty of great content there, like The Story of Europe with Christopher Clark, which takes you on a journey through the continent's history, from ancient Greece, through the Vikings, the Age of Empires, the Enlightenment, and into the modern day. And that's not to mention all the exclusive award-winning films and shows from around the world that you can't watch anywhere else. CuriosityStream is available worldwide, and it adds new shows every week. On top of that, it's one of the very best streaming deals out there. Use the promo code World War II or click the link below and you will save 25%. And this special never would have been made without them. So, back to the mountains. The Germans have more of a mountain warfare heritage than the Allies. In the Great War, the Imperial German Army established the Alpenkorps, which drew much of their manpower from mountainous Bavaria. They fought in the Dolomite Mountains in Italy, in Serbia, and Romania, and they earned the praise of friend and foe alike. The Third Reich also draws on a long Austrian tradition of high-altitude warfare. In fact, the German 3rd Mountain Division was formed in 1938 from 2 Austrian army divisions. As of February 1944, the German army has 8 active mountain divisions and 1 ski division. The Waffen-SS has 5 mountain divisions, but only 1 of these is on the Gustav line. The others are spread around Europe, some on the Eastern Front, some up in Finland and Norway, and others on anti-partisan duty in Yugoslavia. The sole German mountain division manning the Gustav line is the 5th Mountain Division. They're positioned up to the left of Monte Cassino itself. Formed in 1940, their training in the Alps has prepared them for operating in these conditions. After months of rock climbing courses, route marching, mountain navigation, and skiing, the men earned the right to wear the Edelweiss badge on their sleeves and caps. German mountain divisions also use weaponry more suited for this terrain. Their standard rifle is still the Kar 98K, but they also use the shorter barrel Czech design carbine, the Gewehr 3340. This has a barrel length of just 490 millimeters compared to the 600 of the Kar 98K. That makes it lighter and easier to carry in the mountains. Not only are they trained for this environment, they are also battle-hardened. They've seen action in Greece, on Crete, and with Army Group North up near Leningrad. But still, they're only 1 division. Most of the rest of the infantry is just regular German infantry, and by now, their quality has really declined. With the army struggling for manpower, most infantry divisions here now consist of just 6 battalions compared to their former standard of 9. Beyond pure numbers, there is the composition of these units. 3 of the German infantry divisions in Italy are units that were rebuilt after the disaster at Stalingrad last year, like the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division. That was created from the remnants of the 3rd Motorized Infantry Division and the 386th Motorized Infantry Division. It's now filled with fresh-faced young recruits and veterans who have already taken a beating on the Eastern Front. It also has plenty of Volksdeutsche from Poland who are treated as second-class soldiers by the Altreichsdeutsche. Some of them are forcibly recruited under threat of concentration camp. It is no surprise that they have a reputation for being less motivated and less reliable. But one division of mountain troops is still better than no divisions of mountain troops. And right now, the Allies on the Gustav line do not have a single division specifically designated for mountain warfare. That will change when the 4th Moroccan Mountain Division arrives to join the French Expeditionary Corps at the end of February. But for the most part, it's regular infantry doing the hard work. The British Army does possess the 52nd Lowland Infantry Division, which is supposed to operate in mountainous conditions ranging from the subarctic to the subtropical and everywhere in between. The problem is that they're still finishing their training in Scotland. But even when they finish training, the British will not send them to Italy. Harold Alexander, Army Group Commander, will ask if he can have them in May, but his request will be denied. In their absence, it's left to the British Mountain Warfare School in Sapino, Italy, to train small numbers of men as mountain leaders in the theater. But that only got up and running at the end of December last year. Very few men have passed through its doors by now. The Americans are in a similar position. They have the 10th Light Division Alpine, which will become the 10th Mountain Division in November this year. But that division is still training in the States and won't reach the front lines until January 1945. It's left to the rest of the troops to get used to the terrain. Okay, there are some units who find this easier than others because of past experience. During the campaign in Tunisia, the 4th Indian Division won a reputation for good fighting in mountainous terrain. Likewise, for the French, the 2nd Moroccan and 3rd Algerian Infantry Divisions are not mountain divisions per se, but they do have a lot of experience fighting in the mountains of North Africa. The Moroccans are keen knife fighters, and during January's unsuccessful Allied assault on Cassino, they made a name for themselves by slashing their way through parts of the German 5th Mountain Division. But for those unfamiliar with the mountains, Italy is a shock to the system. It doesn't help that Allied planners have seriously misjudged the Italian climate. Autumn and winter bring rain and mud that resembles the Rasputitsa on the Eastern Front. This is followed by snow and blizzards that cut visibility and freeze men to the bones. It is a far cry from the sunny pictures of Italy that the men know from postcards and from travel guides. Ron Goldstein is a driver in the Royal Artillery. Here's how he describes the effect of the weather in Italy. The first winter of 43 found us totally unprepared for the conditions in which we had to serve. It was nothing to have wet clothes on for 3 days at a time. We all had at the most 3 changes of underwear and shirts with which to survive, and very little chance of washing and drying the same. It was not unusual to dig a slit trench to sleep in and to wake up to find ourselves floating in a foot of water. Things are made worse because the retreating German troops badly sabotaged the port of Naples. This means that supplies of cold weather clothing, like heavy combat boots for the Americans, won't arrive until February. Cold trauma injuries rocket in November and December, and old ailments from the Great War resurface again. The U.S. Army has its first 1,000 cases of trench foot of the war. These miserable conditions work to negate one of the main advantages of the United Nations alliance. The Allies are at this point the most modern mechanized army in history, but in the mud-soaked paths and narrow roads of the Italian mountains, they have to replace their trucks with more primitive modes of transport. An army of mules and hired Italian laborers bring ammunition, food, and other supplies up the steep slopes. On their journeys down, they carry the dead and wounded. The Germans have also fortified their positions expertly. They've laid mines and blocked roads by tearing down buildings and felling trees. They've also taken some captured Italian P-2640 tanks and pressed them into service as improvised strongpoints. This concept of static tank defenses will be taken even further later in the war. On the Hitler and Gothic lines, which sit behind the Gustav line, they will use modified Panther tank turrets emplaced as anti-tank bunkers. The 75mm gun turrets will have extra armor to protect against artillery and airstrikes, and will sit on top of a crew compartment dug into the ground. They'll be supported by 2 or 3 75mm or 50mm towed anti-tank guns. All in all, over 190 turret bunkers using various models of tank will be installed on the German defense lines here. Their defenses are literally and metaphorically a mountain for the Allies to climb. But the Allies have some advantages. Although the poor weather has limited the reach of Allied air power over the winter, German supply routes are still very vulnerable. The threat of air attack means it takes longer for them to bring ammunition up and casualties down. In March, the Allies will launch a massive air interdiction campaign called Operation Strangle. As it says on the label, this will strangle German supply routes. Then there's the Allied artillery. The Germans have already learned some hard lessons from this. Early in the fighting, German troops tended to dig themselves in on the forward slopes of a mountain, the slope facing the enemy. I mean, this makes sense, right? You can hold the high ground, and you can look down and shoot at anyone advancing or moving below. But exposing themselves like this also invites a pounding from Allied guns. John Lucas's 6th Corps fires off almost 100,000 shells over a 2-week period in November 1943. He sees it as a tool to save lives. Writing of the men under his command, he explains, "My constant prayer to Almighty God is that I may have the wisdom to bring them through this ordeal with the maximum success and the minimum loss of life. If the lives of American boys are of value, the ravenous appetite of the guns of the 6th Corps is not in vain in spite of the tremendous cost in money and vital transport." To protect themselves from this weight of firepower, the Germans take up positions on the reverse slopes of the mountain, the slope facing away from the enemy, and only maintain observation posts on the forward slope. This also means the enemy has to climb over the crest of the mountain or hill, silhouetting themselves against the sky or the rock face as they do so. This tactic leads to some interesting encounters. Often the opposing sides hear each other before they see each other. In one of my regular episodes, I mentioned the Americans taking the peak of Monte Sammucro on December 7th. 1943. I did not go into too much detail about it, but it was down to men of the 3rd Ranger Battalion to take Sammucro. They are, of course, another one of those units that are better trained for operating in the mountains. Earlier patrols reported that the Germans have abandoned their positions on the mountain. Commander of Company A, Rufus Cleghorn, confidently tells his men, "I don't think there are any Krauts up there." Cleghorn leads his men on a 5-hour climb up the mountain's east face. They advance slowly, with minesweepers going ahead to survey the route. Thick fog covers the ground, and all seems quiet until the Americans are close to the summit. Suddenly, Cleghorn hears a yell from above. "Die kommen nach oben!" They're coming up. But the Germans have reacted too late. With grenades, rifles, machine guns, and shouted insults, the two groups of men battle. By first light, Cleghorn and his men pursue, then chase the German grenadiers down the mountain. Mules bring in their supplies and lay telephone wires. The Germans have set themselves up in new defensive positions a few hundred meters or so down the slope. After that, the fighting gets back to its normal routine. American artillery pounds the enemy, and the German grenadiers respond with volleys of grenades. The two sides are so close that American photojournalist Margaret Bourke-White writes, "The GIs can feel the presence of the enemy through the pores of their skin." In the popular image of the war, Italy may be a bit forgotten in favor of the sweeping maneuver warfare of the Eastern Front, for example. For the Allied and German high commands, it has certainly taken a back seat to the upcoming invasion of France. But we shouldn't overlook the fighting here. It really brings together all the elements of modern and ancient warfare. You've got Allied bombers soaring high above the mountains, and artillery unleashing their deadly barrages on distant targets. But even with all the force of modern arms, the men live at the mercy of nature. They battle the rain, the mud, the cold, and the snow as much as their foes. And when they do meet that foe, nature forces them into the most primal form of combat, closing with and killing the enemy at close quarters. It is safe to say that the men on both sides will not forget the fighting here for a very long time. Thanks to CuriosityStream for making it possible to produce this episode in addition to our regular output. Like I said, they've also got a special offer for all of you, so go to curiositystream.com/World War II for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and nonfiction series. And with the promo code World War II, you can save 25%. And with that, I will see you next time.